The Tevinter Imperium, a name that everyone in Thedas has heard at least once in their life. Across the continent, every man, woman and child knows the story of the once world-covering empire. Well, world-covering in Thedosian terms, since Thedas is merely a continent of the planet, yet the people think of it as the whole world. It is located to the north of the continent, bordering the Anderfells in the west, Nivara in the south and Antiva in the east, beyond the 100 Pillars. Off the northern coast, not far from the peninsula, is the island of Saharan, which the Tevinters have been fighting for centuries now. What makes this country so special though is their history, dating back over a millennia before the founding of the Chantry. It all started, as every human nation does, with their arrival in Thedas. In the Dragon Age universe, humans have not been around from the beginning, but they instead came from a land beyond the borders of Thedas, where from no one knows. They arrived as a single tribe, known as the Neromanians, which later split into multiple others. Those that remained in the north included the Carinus, an eastern kingdom that settled in what is today known as the city of Carinus, the Barindur, a mysterious tribe. Most of their knowledge has been lost to history. There is a legend that says they disappeared after losing the favor of the old god Dumat. Interesting to note, however, is that Solus claims to have seen the lost city of Barindur. According to him, the ruins are buried under the wasteland found at the city's site in modern day, encased in volcanic ash. The Neromanian, those that remained of the original tribe, who existed in their own kingdom. Last, there is the one that all of us know by name, the Tevinter. Originally a splinter group from the Neromanians that eventually allied with the dwarves and formed the Tevinter Imperium, absorbing Carinus and what remained of the Neromanians. They were also the ones responsible for building the largest and perhaps safest city in all of Thedas, the Imperium's capital city of Minrathous. Originally not more than a port city, it is now a faded jewel of the once dominating empire. Nonetheless, as often as it has been sieged, it has never been taken. Strategically located on a rocky island, the city is accessible only by a single bridge that can be destroyed should the need arise. And if that, and the army of mages, wasn't enough, it is also guarded by golems called juggernauts. And if they call the golems juggernauts, you know they mean business. Should for whatever reason the bridge be destroyed, the catacombs beneath the city are filled with enough food to feed the besieged city for an entire year. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Let's talk how it all came to this. The land was at first ruled by a dynasty of kings, while the circles of magi that formed in the cities of tribal Tevinter were at first only closed societies, meant for training and study. They formed a council of their most talented mages, calling themselves the Court of Magisters, who came together in Minrathous. There they decided on the mandate of magic in the kingdom. Amongst them came to be a man that would change the world, Darinius the Ferryman. He was born in the kingdom of Tevinter, to Livia, High Queen of Tevinter and High Priestess of Razikale. During her pregnancy, her non-mage brother Tarsian attacked the palace as soon as she went into labor. He murdered everyone that wouldn't swear allegiance to him. The queen, in the meantime, had retreated to the temple of Razikale, where she waited for her brother, fully armed and armored. Although she just gave birth, and eventually lost the fight, she did manage to take her brother's right arm and eye with her. Just a day later, Calpurnia, a priestess of Dumat in the temple of Varanthium, found a baby boy floating in a basket on the seashore. She raised him as her own and gave him the name Darinius. Showing extraordinary magical talent, he was already a skilled dreamer by the age of 10. When Darinius was 19, the high priest of Dumat lay dying. He sent for all senior acolytes, as well as the novice Darinius, and told them he would name as his heir the man that could bring him that which has no legs yet must dance, has no lungs but must breathe, and has no life yet lives and dies. The young novice quickly solved the riddle by bringing him fire. He was named his heir and became high priest the next day. This sharp wit came useful when the high king of the Neromanians died without an heir. Dumat, Thoth and Lusakan being their patron gods, they called the high priests of all of them, and gave them all the same challenge. They all had until the next sunrise to tie an egg into a knot and place it on a pedestal. Once that was done, the crown would be released from the vaults. While the priests of Thoth and Lusakan went into the Fates straight away to look for answers, Darinius remained in the palace. He smashed an egg, tore a piece of cloth from his clothes and soaked it in the egg, then tied it to a knot, solving the riddle without the aid of magic. On the night of his coronation, his foster mother, Calpurnia, revealed how she had found him and gave him the broken ring that was with him in the basket. The king's war chief recognized the ring as the royal seal of Tevinter, which put Darinius in a difficult position. He had to avenge his mother's death or risk curse on his lineage, but his uncle Tarsian was well fortified in Minrathous, a city that even back then had the reputation of being impregnable. Diplomatic relations were also cut off as the other rulers refused to recognize the Soporati king. Darinius, being the sneaky beaver that he was, sent gifts to Tarsian the next day after a dream he took as a sign from the mud. He claimed to want to heal the rift that had grown between the two nations, to which Tarsian replied, completely flattered, inviting him to Minrathous. Darinius went with only 7 soldiers as his honor guard. Once inside the palace, however, he used magic to keep anyone from entering and challenged his uncle to a duel. The spell was lifted and Tarsian was dead, while Darinius had reforged the seal of Tevinter, proving his claim to the throne. This led to the kingdoms of Tevinter and Romanian being united under Darinius in -12 TE. 7 years later, in -5 TE, he turned his attention to the dwarves. The military campaign in the deep roads would never succeed, so instead he went there himself. They were found by dwarven warriors, and Darinius offered himself as a hostage, asking to be taken to their king in order to negotiate a treaty. The dwarves brought him to Kalsharok, yet wouldn't let him see their king until he had fought in a proving. Proving rather successful, he fought until only one dwarf was left. One that was wearing magnificent armor and wielding a warhammer forged from pure lyrium. They fought for hours, until his opponent, who turned out to be King Endrin's Stonehammer himself, declared him to have Valos Atreidum, the favor of the ancestors. They forged a lasting trade alliance, providing Tevinter with a steady source of lyrium for their spells and good arms for their warriors. It is said that the dwarven embassy in Minrathous, built for King Endrin as a guest home, was built by Darinius himself. It is still in use today and is considered one of the wonders of the world, being entirely subterranean, so that the dwarves that serve in it can retain their caste. In 0 TE, the queen of Carinus, Rathana, realized she could never win an all-out war with the kingdoms of Tevinter and Romanian, and instead offered marriage to Darinius. Their union united the 3 kingdoms in one empire, the Tevinter Imperium. Darinius declared himself the first Archon, and established the magisterium from the priesthood, naming the first priest of the Maat, Thalcian, an honorary Archon. The Court of Magisters that had been in Minrathous for decades became the Royal Court, and Magister became the only title of nobility with actual meaning. The man that accomplished all of this died just 5 years after founding the empire in 5 TE. As the empire grew and expanded, they started to spot elven scouts in the Arthan forest. Strange people with pointed ears, wielding magic that moved through the forest. At first, the 2 races lived alongside each other in peace, with very limited interactions. Yet it started to go downhill after the elves started to avoid contact. In addition, human settlements and emissaries in the region started to disappear. This led to the Imperium declaring war in 214 TE, marching into the Arthan forest to lay siege to the city. 6 years later, according to history, the then Archon Thalcian and his magisters sank the city into the ground using blood magic, destroying all recorded history and knowledge of the elves as a last insult to their race. However, from Abelas, the elven sentry in the Temple of Mythal, we hear that the elves were already in ruins. Tevinter merely picked apart the remains. The Shemlins did not destroy Arthan, we Elven warred upon ourselves. By the time the doors to this sanctuary closed, our time was over. Solus backs this up in Trespasser as well. Those of the Elven that survived the Imperium were enslaved, and from them the Magisters learned to use lyrium to enter the Fate. In 503 TE, when Archon Almadrius chose Tyadrian, a lowborn mage, as his apprentice, and therefore heir, the Magisterium grew outraged, which eventually resulted in the Archon's assassination, leading to a civil war that lasted 72 years. It finally ended in 575 TE, when the new Archon, Parthenius, a former high priest of the Maat, finally allowed the Latents into the ranks of the Magisterium, granting them a whopping 3 seats in it. 575 TE marked the founding of the last great imperial city, Emerius. Many people might know this symbol. It is often found in the city now known as Kirkwall. The City of Chains, as it came to be known, used to be the main trading hub for slaves that the Imperium captured, mostly from Ferelden during the time they ruled the south. Especially useful in their expansion came to be the Imperial Highway, an internationally spanning road made of stone and magic, connecting and granting quick travel to all countries that the Imperium once ruled. Although the Empire, during its apex, stretched as far as southern Ferelden and eastern Rivain, the focus on destroying the Elven Empire allowed the local tribes to fight back against their northern overlords. The Inghirsh being one of those tribes that pushed back, eventually turning into the Empire of Orlais. In 620 TE, yet another civil war erupted, this one however only taking 20 years to resolve. Yet even after order was restored, the damage that was done marked the beginning of the Empire's decline and the end of its golden age. 800 TE is perhaps the most infamous date in Dragon Age history. The old gods began whispering to their high priests from the Fate, Dumat being the first. The high priest by the name of Sethius Alamdris, today known as Corypheus, was promised godhood by Dumat if he came to the Golden City in person. Not able to breach it himself, he went to the high priest of Urthemil, only known as the Architect. Calling it blasphemy at first, he too went along with the plan after Urthemil promised him godhood if he came to them. They brought in the 5 high priests, the Watchman of Luzakan, the Forgerite of Toth, the Epirizer of Andoral, the Augur of Razikael, and the Madman of Zazikel. All of them were promised godhood by each of their chosen deities, thus they agreed to help each other. 100 acolytes were chosen to gather unimaginable amounts of lyrium and slaves beyond counting. The use of lyrium and blood magic ripped open the veil in front of them, and the high priests entered the Fate proud of their accomplishment. What happened after is debated quite often, since the actual records were changed so often that they can't be taken as facts. According to the Andrastian Chantry, the hubris of the Magisters tainted the Golden City, and as punishment the Maker, who sat atop his golden throne, cast them down as Darkspawn. According to Corypheus himself, they found no one, only the already tainted and dark city. The supposed throne of the Maker had been empty as well. In either instance, they returned to Thedas disappointed and with nothing except taint inside of them. It granted them powers similar to an old god, amongst others command of tainted creatures, such as Darkspawn, shown by the Architect, and command of Grey Wardens, shown by Corypheus. Whether coincidence or not, around the time of their return the first Blight broke out. I'll not go into detail on the first Blight, or any Blight really, in this video, otherwise I'll never be done. That I'll save for a video on the Blights themselves. After the Blight was eventually over, in 992 TE, the Imperium, in its severely weakened state, was kicked while it was already on the ground. The escaped slave, Andraste, together with her Avar husband, Metherath, brought a barbarian army from Ferelden north in 1020 TE. Slave revolts, sparked by Andraste's campaign, erupted all over the Imperium, and they eventually arrived at the gates of Minrathous. Even the barbarian hordes, however, were not enough to sack the impregnable city. Her rebellion was put down, caused by Andraste being, well, put down, hard to lead an army while being dead, and without generals, who were also executed, together with her, in public. Archon Hessarion, the man responsible for her execution, converted to the Chantry in 1035 TE, allowing him to reveal the betrayal of Metherath, while at the same time freeing himself from the public disdain. Andraste's story led to the formation of the Chantry in Orlais in 1195 TE. The ruling magisters in Tevinter lost significant influence from being forced into the circles of Magi, and although they fought back against the rules of the Chantry, they eventually surrendered to them, only on their own terms however. Almost 3 ages later, in 387 Towers, the Imperium couldn't be arsed anymore and split from the Chantry, building their own Imperial Chantry, with a mage as divine, who also happened to be a man to fully give the finger to the original Chantry. Tensions grew heated, and over the Black and Exalted Age, the Imperium saw several exalted marches called by the White Divine. As a way of saying thank you for that, when the 4th Blight broke out in 512 Exalted, the Imperium refused to send any kind of aid to the other nations. As if the war with the Chantry hadn't been enough, 1 age later, in 630 Steel, they found someone else to fight with. The Imperium was attacked by the Kunari for the first time, and much of the Empire was conquered. It grew so serious that they had even helped in the Exalted Marches, called once more by the White Divine. They really loved their world wars. These new exalted marches, as they were called, drained the resources of every country, and they eventually led to the Lumerian Accords, an armistice between the Qunari and most nations. Although the nations of Thedas had begun to struggle under the weight of war, what caused the Qunari to retreat was the toll it took upon the people of Ravane. The only country that did not take part in the signing of that peace treaty was, of course, Tevinter, so they are still at war with the Qunari to this day. However, the fight is mostly centered on and around the island of Seheran. The influence that Magisters had lost when they were pushed into the circles was restored in 734 Storm, when the new Archon was elected directly from the circle. He quickly abolished all laws that forbade mages from participating in politics. In modern days, meaning 941 Dragon, the Imperium is led by the cunning Archon Rhodonis. Regarding the Venatori and their worship of Corypheus, they claim to have no official ties with the cult, focusing more on their southern neighbors, Nevarra, with whom they are on the verge of renewed conflict. The people of Tevinter take great pride in their history and culture, despite being notoriously decadent. They treasure their past and preserve everything they have built, shown quite extensively in Menrathis. The running elite, the Magisters, are driven by ambition and magical talent in their drive for influence and power. This lust for power leads them to grasping every advantage over their competitors they can, not shying away from blood magic as well. Although it is officially banned in Tevinter, along with the rest of the world, the people of the Northern Empire are more practical. Everyone knows at least the basics, and the ban itself is more of a moral rule than official law. It is necessary to be able to defend yourself in their quite dangerous and often deadly rivalries. Those rivalries mostly stay within their upper social class, the Altus Mages however. The Tevinter population is split into 3 classes, the first, as I already said, being the Altus class. They are believed to be descendants of the Dreamers or Magisters who were able to speak with the Old Gods and the Fade. Although the Old Gods are no longer worshipped in Tevinter, those descendants are powerful mages, held in esteem and are often high-ranking mages. The middle class is that of the Latents. They are formed of mages who were born into families that had thus far shown no magic in their blood, or those who didn't have a link to the Dreamers or Altus Mages. About a third of Archons throughout history have been from the Latent class, the most prominent among them being Teadrian. His rise to Archon only sparked a civil war that lasted more than 70 years, but this at least granted them their 3 seats. The lowest class of Tevinter citizens are the Soporati, those that don't show any magical talent. It is mostly composed of humans that are allowed to own property and serve in the military. They have no real power though. Almost all of them hope, unlike the rest of Thedas, to be granted a child with magical talent so they can advance to the Latent class. There is, however, a 4th class, yet those that are part of it or want to be are not considered citizens of Tevinter under any circumstances. I'm talking about the Liberati, a class of slaves that have been granted freedom. Although they are able to join the Circle or the Chantry or apprentice for a trade, they have no real power at all and are not allowed to join the military. That leads me to the greatest difference between Tevinter and the rest of Thedas. Slavery is still legal in the Imperium. Humans, elves and even Qunari are able to be legally bought or sold. And although uprisings are rather frequent, they pose no real threat and are very rarely successful. Slaves can only attain their freedom through one of 2 ways. One is to be granted freedom by a judge, however this required the slave's master to be present and make the decree themselves. The other way is being granted freedom by the owner's will upon their death. The Imperium is still governed by powerful mages. Its nobility known to be overindulgent and slavery still practiced, which is universally reviled by the other nations. The country itself is the center of the black market and smuggling, even smuggling mage fugitives from other countries. Tevinter would collapse without slavery. It's the only way to support their economy. History proves how deeply they care about that practice. An Archon that once outlawed slavery was assassinated not long after that, a tradition that still lives on, unlike its victims. If the Imperium was not focused on the Qunari, they would turn on the southern nations as the Imperium is still a force to be reckoned with. The legislative body of Tevinter is the Imperial Senate. It is divided into 2 houses, the Magisterium and the Publicanium. The Magisterium, which is a name everyone has heard, is the upper house that is responsible for making laws and choosing a new Archon should there be no approved heir. The Publicanium, on the other hand, doesn't have any real power at all. It is simply a bureaucratic body. The Magisters constantly compete with each other to rise to a higher position, yet all of them come together to put down slave rebellions. Their competition is kind of like the Grand Game in Orlais, only less elegant, since they don't care how it looks to the outside. There are a few ways to get a seat in the Magisterium. One of them is to attain one through cunning and skill, and a whole lot of blood magic. Other than ranking up in the Magisterium though, each of the 7 circles in Tevinter elects one Magister from their senior enchanters. The Grand Clerics and the Divine of the Chantry himself also each holds a seat. It's also possible to inherit a seat from someone, rather than murdering your way to the top. A final way to get one is by being granted one by the Archon directly. It is a right the Archon may exercise at any time. Speaking of Archon, they are the true rulers of Tevinter. The magic they wield gives them god-given authority over the others. Whether that god is one of the old gods or the Maker doesn't matter. They may appoint magisters at will and have the final say on any laws under consideration. The position itself is inherited, often by relatives or the apprentice of the Archon. Should no heir be named, the Magisterium elects one that is not a magister or a member of the Imperial Chantry. Tevinter itself is a nation disdained and distrusted by all others. Their historical rules in fucking up almost everything demonizes them to the point where, for example, Tevinter writings outside of the Imperium can rarely be found in a way that hasn't been heavily altered or outright forged. Tevinter, on the other hand, views the rest of Thedas as barely civilized savages who lack the proper reverence for tradition and respect for authority. Perhaps the best relationship they enjoy with the dwarves. Since the time of Archon Darinius, they have been on good terms, the trade between the two nations ever steady. The Imperium has a constant need for lyrium, and the dwarves, being the only people to safely mine it, can provide. The Imperium hosts many dwarven embassies, since ancient times, with those in the major cities being subterranean. The dwarves also have their own branch of government, the Ambassadoria, yet that is more of a lobbying party than an actual parliament. There are no known cases of dwarves being kept as slaves in the Imperium, likely as to not damage the good relations between the two nations. With the ending of Inquisition, here is hoping we will be able to see Tevinter with our own eyes one day. Until then, I thank you very much for watching. Vitae Benefaria.
Dragons in the sky, the fighting has begun. Shadow versus light, and who will stand when it is done? Magisters and friars.